Hello, BookTube. This is Alan, and I'm here for a second video, and this one is on Memoirs from Beyond the Grave, 1768 to 1800 by Francois Rene de Chateaubriand. I've talked about this book in previous videos, but let me give an update for those who may have missed the previous videos. Francois Rene de Chateaubriand was born in Saint-Malo in 1768 during the reign of Louis XIV. He, let me see, I'm reading here. He was brought up in solitude in a medieval castle, nestled in the woods of Brittany by a father's nostalgia for feudal times was unremitting. At 18, he had left his family home and enlisted as a sub-lieutenant in the Royal Army, and was thrown into the vortex of the most turbulent period of French history, a span of time marked by the Revolution of 1789. And he went to Paris and to Versailles, and he hunted with the Louis XVI and met Marie Antoinette. And when the French Revolution took hold, he fled to England. And in England, he wrote, and then he decided to go to America, and actually decided to find a trip to the post and passage to the post. So he meets George Washington, and he has a little comment here: the difference between Napoleon and George Washington. And he was in 1791. It says here that Philadelphia did not extend as far as the Schuylkill River, but the ground over toward that tributary had already been divided into lots, and on these lots several houses were constructed. And he had said Philadelphia had a monotonous look, in general, was missing for the Protestant cities of the United States, or any great works of architecture. The Reformation, young in years, sacrificed nothing to the imagination, as really rarely rise these domes, these airy naves, or those twin spires from which the ancient Catholic religion has crowned Europe. Not one monument in Philadelphia, New York, or Boston, pyramids above the massed walls and roofs, the eye is saddened to behold such an even level. Yeah, I'd be alive today. So he's in Philadelphia, meets with Boston, it meets with George Washington, and then he journeys from Philadelphia to New York to Boston. It said, when I formed the idea of discovering the Northwest Passage, no one knew whether the northern part of America extended to the pole and adjoined Greenland, or whether it terminated in some body of water that linked the Hudson Bay with the Bering Strait. In 1772, Hearne had discovered the sea at the north of the Copper Mine River, latitude 71 degrees 50 minutes north, longitude 119 degrees 15 minutes west of Greenwich. On the coast of the Pacific Ocean, the efforts of Captain Cook and explorers followed him left some doubts. In 1787, a ship was said to have entered the inland sea of North America. According to the account of this ship's captain, all that had been taken for the uninterrupted coastlines north of California is buried in a chain of islands so set extremely close together. The English Admiralty sent Vancouver to verify the reports, which found out to be false. Vancouver had not yet made its second voyage, and he goes on and tries to find the passage. And then he comes up to, this is still on book 7, just 12 books for this, and let me see some other things. He heads down to Florida, and he actually meets the American Indians. And his encampment on the shore of the Onondagas Lake, Arabs, of course, in botany, and the Indian, and the cow is the title of this chapter. M. Violet offered me his credentials for the Onondagas, the last remnant of one of the 6 Iroquois nations, first arrived at the lake that bears the Onondagas name. There the Dutchman searched out a suitable spot to set up camp. A river flowed from the lake, and at the bend of the river we pitched our shelter. We hammered 2 stakes into the ground 6 foot apart and hung a long pole horizontally in the forks of these stakes. Strips of birch bark, one end resting on the other draped over the traversing poles, formed the slanted roof on a palace. And so, said he did not wander far. 15 years later, he mentioned that he had bivouacked in the desert sands of Saba, a few paces from the Jordan on the banks of the Dead Sea. And those Swiss sons of Arabia appear to be listening to tales of the sheik as they were partaking in the stories of Antar and the horse in Job. So that's where he comes up with the Arab there. So he meets with the Iroquois Indians, sachem of the Onondagas Valley in the Franks, and he has hospitals. And he journeys on to the Genesee River, and he sees a charmed rattlesnake. And he meets another Indian family. He nights in the forest, and he goes to Niagara Falls, which is on the cover here. From there, he decides to travel down to Florida. And he meets so he journeys on to Florida and the Valley of the Tombs in the course of the Ohio River. He has a lot of quotes here from Cicero and ancient sources and Dante, and here's one from here's a quote: "No day has ever followed night, nor night ever followed dawn, that has not heard the sound of the weeping, mingled with the mournful wailings, attendants of the dark, death and dark funerals." I'll check let me check in the back, see where that's from. That's book 8, number 1. That is from Lucretius de Reron, Nature Book 2, line 578. So he meets with the Muskogees and the Seminoles in the wilderness of Florida. It was interesting, as I was reading this part, I was also listening to Bruckner, Anton Bruckner's symphony, and the conductor was, afterwards, there's an interview with the conductor, and this is on the Berlin Philharmonic, which is offering a 30-day free trial. It's not a trial, but access to their Berlin Concert Hall. And after a concert, they always have an interview with the either conductor or the soloist. And this particular conductor was saying that Bruckner had in this symphony was talking about the wilderness, about the forest, about the birds, and it's very so. I was reading this, and he's talking about the Seminole and the Muskogee. The Seminole and Muskogee men are quite tall, but by an extraordinary contrast, their mothers, wives, and daughters, the smallest race of women known in America. The Indian women who sat near us in mixed Cherokee and Castilian blood were tall of stature. 2 of them resemble Creoles from Santo Domingo or Mauritius. but they were yellow and delicate like the women of the Ganges. These two Floridians, paternal cousins, served me as models, the one for Attila and the one for Seduta. They surpassed the portraits that I made of them only for viable and fugitive truth of the nature. And so he meets the ruins of Ohio, and and he goes on to and he finds out that the king, Louis XVI, is arrested. So that causes him to abandon his search for the Po, the passage of the Po, and take off to back to France. And he says here that George Washington's farewell address to the people of the United States might have been spoken by one of the greatest characters of antiquity. How far in the discharge of my official duties, said the general, I have been guided by the principles which have been delineated the public records and other evidences of my conduct must witness to you in the world. Myself, the assurance of my own conscience is at least believe myself to be guided by them. Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am conscious of the intentional error, and nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. Whatever they may be, I have fervently beseeched the Almighty to avert and mitigate the evils of which they may tend. I shall also carry with me the hope of my country will never cease to view them with indulgence, and that at the 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with an upright zeal, the fault of incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as myself must soon be to the mansions of rest. So he also talks about Jefferson, who, in death of one of his two children, writes, the loss which I experienced is great indeed. Others may lose in abundance, but I, in my want, had lost even the half of all I had. My evening prospects now hang on the slender thread of a single life. Perhaps I may be destined to see the last cord of paternal affection broken. Now, and back, this is still in book 8, but he has a little chapter called Dangers for the United States, and this is what I wanted to focus on. And this is sort of reads like Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. But will America preserve its form of government? Will the states not sunder? As a representative from Virginia not already argued for the ancient theory of liberty, which accepted slavery, and which was a result of paganism, against a representative from Massachusetts who defended the cause of modern liberty without slavery, which Christianity has wrought? Aren't the northern and the southern states opposed in their opinions and interests? Wouldn't the western states so far from Atlantic prefer their own regime? One wonders whether the federal bond is strong enough to preserve the Union and compel each state to stand ranked around it. On the other hand, if the power of the presidency were increased, would despotism not be close behind, bringing with all its obligations and privileges of a dictator? The isolation of the United States has given birth and space to grow. It is doubtful whether such a state could have lived, let alone thrived, in Europe. The Swiss Federation subsists among us is true, but why? Because it is small, poor, and walled in by mountains, a nursery for royal soldiers and the destination for travelers. Separated from the old world, the population in the United States still inhabits a sort of wilderness. Its solitude has made it free, but already the conditions of its existence are being altered. The presence of democracies in Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Buenos Aires, constantly trouble as these democracies are, is a danger. When the United States has nothing near them except the colonies of transatlantic kingdom, serious warfare was unlikely. But today, isn't it rivalry to be feared? If there were a rush to arms on all sides, the military spirit sees the children of Washington, a great captain might emerge to take the throne. Glory loves the crown. I said that the northern, southern, and western states are divided in their interests, which is common knowledge. But if these states broke from the Union, would they be reduced to bearing arms? If so, what enmities will ferment and spread through the body politic? If the dissident states were to claim their independence, every kind of discord would erupt across the emancipated states. These overseas republics can be undone if formed deliberated units of no weight or social scale are be successfully subjugated by some single state among them. I pass over the serious subject of alliance and foreign interventions. Kentucky, peopled by a bolder, more rustic, more militant race, was seemed destined to be the conquering state. And this state that would devour the others. The power of one would soon rise above the ruins of the power of all. I have spoken of the danger of war, but I must also recall the dangers of prolonged peace. Since their emancipation, the United States has enjoyed, apart for a few short months, a period of most profound tranquility. While hundreds of battles shook Europe to a truth, they went on securely cultivating the fields, the conscious of the increased population and wealth, with all the inconvenience that followed from the superabundance of people and money. If hostilities descend on unwarlike people, would they be able to resist? How could they bring themselves to renounce the indignant ways, their comforts, and gentler habits of life? China and India sleep in the muslins, have been constantly subject to foreign domination. What best suits the complex of a free society is a state of peace tempered by war, or a state of war tempered by peace. The Americans have already worn the olive crown for too long a time. The tree that provides it is not native to their shores. A mercantile spirit is beginning to take hold of them. Self-interest become a natural vice. Already the gambling spirit of the banks of the different states have hindered them, and bankruptcies are threatening their common well. So long as liberty produces gold, the industrial republic performs wonders, but when the gold is spent or exhausted, the republic loses their love of liberty that is founded not on a moral sentiment, but originated in a thirst for profit and a passion for industry. What's more, it is difficult to create a homeland from states which have no community rooted in religion, material interests, which have risen from different sources at different times, and which survive on different soils and their different suns. What connection is there between a Frenchman from Louisiana, a Spaniard from Florida, German from New York, an Englishman from New England, Virginia, the Carolinas, or Georgia, all of whom are reputed to be Americans? One is a frivolous duelist, one is a proud and lazy Catholic, one is a Lutheran farmer who owns own slaves, one a Puritan merchant. How many centuries will it take to render these elements homogeneous? And he goes on like this, and just talks about what is what's the word for it? I can't think of the word. Enormous imbalance of wealth is a more serious threat to the spirit of equality than any other. A few Americans possess 1 or 2 million in income. The Yankees of high society no longer live like Benjamin Franklin, the true gentleman, disguised by his new country, goes to Europe looking for the ode. He can be found in every hotel, make a tour of Italy, vying with the English and extravagance and spleen. These vagrants from Carolina and Virginia buy up ruined abbeys in France, plant English gardens with American trees in Milan. Naples may send New Yorkers singers and performers. Paris are fashions and dancers. London are grooms, boxers. But those exotic delights don't give Union any great pleasure. In America, men amuse themselves by leaping into Niagara Falls as cheering of 50,000 planters, half savages who laugh only at the sight of pain of death. And I'll just finish this. I'll finish this pretty long, sorry. In some, the United States gives the impression of being a colony, not a mother country. They have no past, and the mores are not a result of the laws. The citizens of the New World took their place in nations at the moment when political ideas were in ascendant, and this explains how the transfer of themselves with such unusual rapidity. Anything resembling permanent society appears to be impracticable among them. On one hand, this is due to the extreme ennui of its individual citizens. On the other, to the impossibility of remaining in place and the need for motion that dominates their lives. Placed upon the ocean roads at the forefront of progressive, I skipped part. For man is never truly settled when the house of gods are wanderers. Placed upon the ocean roads at the forefront of progressive opinions as to do as this country, the American seems to be having inherited from Columbus the mission to discover new worlds rather than create them. So he goes back to France. He is shipwrecked. He joins the ones opposed to the revolution. He is shot. He gets into smallpox. He almost dies. He flees again to England. He meets with the future king of England, and he keeps going on like that. And the book and it's interesting that during the revolution, those with the revolution wanted to attack the king and the priest, so religion. So they went and burned the Catholic churches. They burned all the Catholic churches there in England because they were basically they were also, and he calls it that. But let us heed a history. Sixtus the Fifth said that Jacques Clement devotion was equal salvation of mankind to the mystery of the Incarnation, just as Marat was compared to the Savior of the world. Charles IX wrote to the governors of Providence to emanate to St. Barnabas to massacre, just as Danton ordered patriots to copy the September massacres, and the Jacobins were plagiarists. They even plagiarized the sacrifice of Louis XVI from the execution of Charles I. And this is if you want a good kind of study of the French Revolution, this is a good book to read. And as I was saying, with the attacking the churches, the Catholic churches, and burning them down, and doing away with the mass and killing priests and anything, it reminds me of Henry VIII of England, who was denied a divorce by the Roman Catholic Church. So he set out and had his own religion, started his own church, and started burning down Catholic churches. And you can see that today. You can see burnt down churches, Catholic churches, they still have in England. I don't know why, but they still do. And talks about sieges, talks about smallpox, and so he meets with the future king of England, and then it's interesting. He meets with the future king of England, and then the next writing, the next chapter, he's broke, he's poor, and so it's like here to there. So he writes a letter. He writes a book called The Genius of Christianity, and to help him with his finances. And he has a little section here about Shakespeare, English literature, and the fading of the old school historian, poets, civilians, and Shakespeare. And he talks, English political works were of little interest to us. Economic treatise was something less described, since calculations of the wealth of nations, the employment of capital, and the balance of trade. And he was talking about Edmund Burke. He talks about Milton, and talks about Shakespeare. Who needs my Shakespeare, Milton writes, for his honored bones, the labor of age, and the pile of stones. And Shakespeare would have a great number of lovers. We reckoned in one per sonnet. The creator Desdemona and Juliet grew old without losing his taste for love. Was the unnamed woman addressed in such charming verse proud or happy to be the object of Shakespeare's sonnets? The tragic Englishman wrote his mistress, "No longer mourn for me when I am dead. Then you shall hear the sullen bell give warning to the world that I am fled, for this foul world with vilest worms to dwell." Nay, if you read this line, remember not the hand that writ it, for I love you so, that I in sweet thoughts would be forget. If thinking on me then should make you woe. Oh, if I say you look upon this verse, when I perhaps compound or am with clay, do not so much as poor name rehearse, but let your love ever with my life decay. Let the wise world should look into your mourn and mock you with me after I'm gone. And so he talks about Shakespeare, and said Shakespeare, when he lived, had no thought whether he would live after death. And he goes on talking about Shakespeare, the old novels, new novels. He talks about Walter Scott and Vicar of Wakefield, and he talks about different. Burke may have rooted English politics in the past, but Walter Scott pushed the English back to the Middle Ages. Everything that he wrote and made and built was Gothic: books, furniture, churches, castles. But the lords of the Magna Carta are truly the fashionables of Bond Street. He talked about Thomas More, Campbell, Rogers, Crabe, Wordsworth, Southey, Hunt, Knowles, Lord Holland, Gannon, Crooker. Said a man must be born English to appreciate the merit of some intimate style of composition, which comes home particularly to natives. So, and certain accents belong only to the homeland. English and Germans had the most Baroque nations, and they don't understand Rene, La Fontaine, even the most Moliere. So it makes one laugh to learn the names of our great writers in London, Vienna, Berlin, Petersburg, Munich, Leipzig, Göttingen, Cologne, We admire the Greeks and Romans by hearsay. Our administration comes to us from tradition, and the Greeks or Romans are not here to mock our barbarian judgments. Who among us can form any idea of the harmonious of Cicero, the cadences of Horace, as they must have sound to the German or Latin ear? Barnes, Mason, Corpo died during my London exile that ended one century and I began another. Erasmus, Darwin, Betty died 2 years after my return from exile. Betty had heralded the new era of literary poetry, the minstrels of the progress of genius. So this he talks about Lord Byron and the minstrels. When I rode the young highland over the dark heath and climbed the steep summit of marvelous snow to gaze on the torrent that thundered beneath in the midst of the tempests that gathered below. And he really enjoys Lord Byron and other poets. So I'm going to have to, this has gone on over 30 minutes. So that was Francois Rene de Chateaubriand, who is known as the father of French Romanticism. So take care, have a good weekend, and have a good happy Easter.